Hello and welcome to the channel. I am here for my end of the year list 2019. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I thought this year has just been absolutely fantastic for music. Easily been one of the best years for music of this decade. I thought it's been way better than the last few years to come, I thought it was better than 2018 and 2017. So yeah, this year has just been very solid for music. There's just been an incredible lineup of albums, and to my knowledge, this is probably the best year for music of this decade, if you ask me at least. So with all that being said, it was really hard to go through this the lineup of albums that I've listened to this year and rank them all. I mean, this is one of the most difficult end of the year lists that I've ever had to make because of how much good material came out this year. I felt like we've been really spoiled with a lot of great music this year. So yeah, we're of course going to go from worst to best, what I think is the weakest of the best to the top best, of course. I got 13 albums listed here, and keep in mind that this list could change, especially whenever you get to the top 6 of this list, maybe, because once I get to the sixth album, number 6 on the list, that's kind of where things start to get a little complicated, I think, because that's where things can get a little debatable, like, oh, I don't know, But yeah, when it came to the bottom of my rankings for this list, it was fairly simple. So let's go ahead and get into the bottom, which I thought was the weakest of the best of this year. And at the bottom, at number 13, I got Heart Like a Grave by Insomnium. Now, I know there's going to be some disagreements with this being at the bottom, but I don't know about you guys, but this album, I haven't really returned to it much since its release date. There's definitely some highlights here, though. I really like Pale Morning Star. I remember when that was one of the singles to the album, and I think it is one of their best songs. This is a pretty solid Insomnium record, but it just doesn't reach the heights that their last album, Winter's Gate, had, in my opinion at least. But that's not to say that this is a bad album, of course, otherwise it wouldn't be on the list. I think it's a good album, but just happens to be my least favorite of this year. So yeah, Insomnium's newest album, Heart Like a Grave, at number 13. So at number 12, we got I the Mask by In Flames. Now, maybe some people might disagree with this album being above Insomnium's latest album, but for me personally, I returned to this thing a whole lot more than Insomnium's newest record. One of the things I can really appreciate with I the Mask is, I don't want to say it's a return to form, but it's a step in the right direction for In Flames for sure. It's definitely a lot better than their last couple of releases, Siren Charms and Battles. I mean, those albums were easily the band's weakest albums, but with I the Mask, it's definitely better. That's not to say that it's much better, and that's not to say that it's a great album. I think it's just a good album. I think that this is probably their best album since A Sense of Purpose or Sounds of a Playground Fading, so yeah. But in my opinion, I'd be perfectly fine if this ended up being the final record that In Flames has to offer. I mean, if In Flames is going to continue with this alternative metal sound, I mean, they pretty much got nothing left to prove, I think. This is pretty much the best that they're going to get, at least with that specific genre. I would really like if this band really went back to the days of the Jester Race or, Colony, albums like them, their 90s material. But that's not too likely because, well, Anders Fried's still in the band, so yeah. But I the Mask definitely has some good stuff on it. I really like Voices. That's probably my favorite song on the album. The title track's pretty good. Call My Name is also really good. And the song Burn is a song that's surprisingly grown on me. It was a song I was not crazy about at first, but I've grown to like it a little bit. So yeah, while this album isn't perfect, I'd say it's just a good album. But yeah, again, I think it's better than the last couple of albums that In Flames had to offer in their career. So I got In Flames with their album I the Mask at number 12. Okay, so at number 11... At number 11, we got Pitfalls by Leprous. I really wanted this album to be higher on the list, but I mean, this album just really hasn't been doing the best with replay value, but I still think it's a really good album. There's, many great songs that I like from it. I remember when I first heard the song Below, which was one of the singles. I really liked this song, and it still remains as one of my favorite tracks on this album. And I still think it's a really good album. I don't think it's as good as the last couple of releases that Leprous had to offer, but this album, Pitfalls, I think is still really good. The replay value isn't the strongest, but I think for what the album is, it's a pretty good listen. So yeah, I think this is actually a pretty good album. So yeah, at number 11, I got Pitfalls by Leprous. Okay, so next up we got, at number 10, Verklighten by Soilwork. Now, for the longest time, I've actually had In Flames' newest album higher than Soilwork's newest album. And I think a part of that was just a bias thing because I am more, when it comes to like Swedish melodeath and stuff, I do prefer In Flames over Soilwork. But to be honest with you guys, I think Soilwork just put out the better record this year. Now, this is one of those albums that came out very early in the year. And I think for that reason, it was one of those albums that I feel was very forgotten. Like, it didn't really feel like, it was 2019 release. But I think this is a good album for what it is, though. I don't think it's as good as their last album, The Ride Majestic. But this album, Verklighten, I still think is a really good album for what it is, for sure. I feel like with this album, I feel like Soilwork is heading in this direction that's more, radio friendly, more melodic. They're not sticking to their, I guess, melodeath roots, you can say. Now, I wouldn't say that this is a complete stretch away from Soilwork's sound, especially when you listen to the early 2000s work from the band. But you know how it is. Some bands just keep going more radio friendly as their career goes. But Verklighten, I still think it's a really good album. While I don't think it's as good as The Ride Majestic, I still think it's a really good album. I remember when the single Arrival came out, I was really digging this song, and it's still one of my favorites on the album. I really like this song. It's maybe one of Soilwork's best songs that they've ever done, honestly. I think there's a lot of good stuff on this record. While it's not perfect, I think it's a very good album. So, at number 10, I got Soilwork with their newest album, Verklighten. Okay, so at number 9, now some of you guys actually might be surprised to see this album on the list, since I've never talked about this record, I've never reviewed this album, or even talked about the band before. But next up, at number 9, we got Dominion by Hammerfall. Now, this is one of those albums that I was very interested to check out from after what I've heard from the record. It kind of sounds like maybe like if Judas Priest was a modern band, you could say. This album, I feel like, is very Judas Priest influenced, and that I can pretty much say for the rest of the band, even though I'm not too familiar with the band, so don't quote me on anything, of course. But this is the only album that I've heard from Hammerfall, and I think it's really good, honestly. It's just really neat to hear bands in this time create music like this. Now, I believe Hammerfall is a 90s band, but you guys know what I mean. That's still pretty new to be creating this style of music, I think. And I think it works out really well. I mean, I wish more bands in metal took more inspiration from the older bands, like Judas Priest. So, yeah. If you're someone who likes Judas Priest, I think you're going to really dig this record. So, yeah, there's not really much to say about it. I think it's a really good listen. So, yeah, at number 9, I got Hammerfall with their album Dominion. Okay, so at number 8, now some of you guys actually might be a little surprised I don't have this higher on the list. And that would be War and Peace by Demon Hunter. Now, this is one of those albums that I was really expecting to be a little bit higher on the list. I wasn't really expecting it to be number 1 since, these two records haven't held up well for me this year, especially during the second half of the year. Now, the first half of the year, when these albums came out, I was really digging them, but when the second half of the year came around, they just have really fallen off for me. And you know, whenever I heard that Demon Hunter was coming out with not one but two new records, I mean, I was really excited. I was like, holy crap, 2 new albums, each have 10 songs on them? That's 20 new tracks worth of new Demon Hunter songs. I'm going to be listening to them a lot this year, right? Well, not exactly. And maybe some people might be surprised that I don't have these 2 records somewhere in the top 3, considering kind of my bias towards Demon Hunter, you know, since they were like one of the guys that really helped me get into metal. But if you guys know me well enough, if you guys have seen my list of 2017, their last album, Outlive, wasn't even in the top 5, so why would this year be any exception? But yeah, I do think that these albums are better than their last album, Outlive, you know. Not to say that they're much better, but I still think they're really good albums. The album War mainly focuses on Demon Hunter's, you know, traditional side, you know. This is the kind of style that you usually get with Demon Hunter, you know, just traditionally a metalcore sound. While the Peace album is more experimental, you know. And that's one of the things I do appreciate about War and Peace, and it's a unique concept for Demon Hunter. And I'm glad that they went with this idea. Now, from what I know, I believe that their vocalist Ryan Clark stated that they're not going to be doing something like this ever again. Like, this is just going to be a one-off thing. You know, the 2 released 2 albums on the same day. And I'm glad that they tried it, to be honest, because it's definitely unique. You know, with the album War, you get a lot of great songs on it, like On My Side, The Negative, and Lesser Gods, of course. Lesser Gods, I think, is one of their best closing tracks, to be honest. And with the Peace album, you get really good songs like Loneliness and Recuse Myself. Out of the 2 releases from Demon Hunter this year, I do prefer War more, only because there's a few tracks on the Peace album that I find either just boring or just kind of cringeworthy, to be honest. But I think both albums, for what they are, they're really good. I don't think that these are the best albums that Demon Hunter has done, but they're still very good albums, and if you're a Demon Hunter fan, haven't heard them, I'd recommend checking them out. So yeah, while not in the top 5 of this year, I think that these albums are still very good. But yeah, again, not one of Demon Hunter's best, but these 2 records, War and Peace, they're good. So at number 8, I got Demon Hunter's newest albums, War and Peace. Okay, so at number 7, this is another band that I haven't talked about much on this channel before either. I also haven't reviewed this album yet, and the album is The Wings of War by Overkill. Now, this, I believe, is one of my first Overkill albums. I believe it was the second album of theirs I've heard. The first album of theirs I've heard, I think, was one of their classic albums. I can't remember the name of it. I heard it some point, like a couple of years ago, maybe. But yeah, this is my second album from the band, and I really dig it, honestly. It's really good thrash metal. You know, and I've heard debates on, you know, Overkill being the next band that in the Big Four whenever Slayer retires, of course. And I'm totally on board with that, to be honest. I really like this album too, The Wings of War. I mean, I was pleasantly surprised by it, especially the first few tracks. I mean, one of the main standouts about this album for me is the guitar work. I think the guitar work is actually pretty outstanding. I remember that was really one of the things that really impressed me with this album. So, yeah, I won't go into full detail about it, but yeah, I think that this is a really good album for sure. So, yeah, at number 7, I got Overkill with their album, The Wings of War. Okay, so at number 6, now, like I said, once you get to number 6, this is where things start to get a little complicated. This is where you get into the really good stuff that came out this year. But yeah, at number 6, I got We Are Not Your Kind by Slipknot. Now, I really dig this album, you know. I believe this album charted really high when it came to iTunes and sales and stuff. And, you know, of course, it's Slipknot. You know, Slipknot is a pretty popular band, if we're honest here. I mean, pretty much no matter what record they have coming out, it'll sell well. And yeah, I really like this album. I think it's their best album since the early 2000s work. I think it's definitely better than their last album, The Gray Chapter. Now, I am someone who is a fairly newer fan of Slipknot. I didn't become a fan till 2017, which I know is really late, because I know when a lot of people get into Slipknot, it is usually during their early days of being into metal, but personally, not me. But I am glad that I did get into Slipknot nonetheless. And, you know, this new album, We Are Not Your Kind, it's a solid release. I really like it. I mean, Unsainted, Birth of the Cruel, Orphan, Spiders, and just so many great songs on this album, man. I mean, this is one of those albums you can't go wrong with. This album does have its fair share of haters, either by those who are people that hate Slipknot, or just people that were really expecting, the band to go back to the days of the debut album or something. But that's not what you're going to get, but don't go into this album expecting that. I still think it's a really great album, though. And yeah, it's definitely my favorite new metal album of the year. So at number 6, we got Slipknot's newest album, We Are Not Your Kind. Okay, so at number 5, now, this is where things start to get even more complicated, because some might argue that this could be number 1 or number 2, But at number 5, we got Atonement by Killswitch Engage. This album is just great. I really love this album. Killswitch Engage is another band that I think I'm kind of new to. I'm not new to them. Maybe it's just, I'm getting old and new to me is still 3 years ago. Yes, I did become a Killswitch Engage fan 3 years ago, around when Incarnate came out, and I really did like their last album, Incarnate. I thought it was one of the band's best work. This album is without exception. I really like Atonement. I mean, many great songs on it, like Unleashed, The Signal Fire, and Ravenous. These are all songs that pretty much still hold up for me, and as well as the rest of the album too. This is just a fantastic album, and I think that this is another one of Killswitch Engage's best albums. So, if you're someone who listens to metalcore, you haven't listened to this album yet from Killswitch Engage, please check out this album. You're missing out. It's definitely a great album, so yeah, it's definitely one of the best metalcore albums of the year. I mean, you even had Howard Jones come back and appear on one of the songs, so yeah. This is an album that I think is going to be pleasing to every Killswitch Engage fan, for sure. So yeah, this is just a solid album, so that's what I got at number 5. Killswitch Engage's newest album, Atonement. Now we're here at number 4. Now at number 4, we're getting into what I think is the best metalcore album of the year, and that is Shaped by Fire by As I Lay Dying. Now, this is of course the band's first album in 7 years, due to their long hiatus. Tim Lambesis went to prison, and all the rest of the other band members, started a new project, and it just seems like they picked up where they left off, from their last album, Awakened. And, believe it or not, I think this new album, Shaped by Fire, is actually better than Awakened. This album is it's fantastic. It definitely is. This is definitely within the top 3 best As I Lay Dying records, at least in my opinion. This album has almost everything you want from the band. It has all the melodies and the heaviness and just so much goodness to it, I think. You, of course, got great songs like Blinded, the title track, Undertow, My Own Grave, of course, Take What's Left, and just so many others. This album is just fantastic. You cannot go wrong with this album. This is another album that I would recommend to people who love metalcore, who haven't listened to this album or As I Lay Dying yet. But yeah, now maybe because this is my favorite metalcore album, might be a little biased, because As I Lay Dying was one of my first metalcore bands, besides Demon Hunter, of course. But yeah, I just really love As I Lay Dying. I mean, I think, almost everything that they have in their catalog is fantastic. So, this album is without exception. It's definitely one of the best albums of the year. So, that's what I got at number 4. Shaped by Fire by As I Lay Dying. Great album. Okay, so we're in the top 3. Now, this is where we get into the progressive metal. Now, if you guys know me well enough, progressive metal is probably my favorite subgenre of metal these days, so maybe placing the top 3 as progressive metal bands might be a little, biased, I think, But I think, like I said before, these top 6 or top 5 could easily be switched around, so that's something you got to keep in mind. Because once you get to the top 5, it's just really difficult. But at number 3, I got Distance Over Time by Dream Theater. Almost forgot the band name for a minute. But yeah, this album is just... God, what do I need to say about it? It's awesome. It's a great album for sure. Is this one of Dream Theater's best albums? No, but I would say that it's maybe their best since... I don't know. Maybe either since Octavarium or Black Clouds and Silver Linings. But yeah, this album is fantastic. I remember when the singles came out, especially Untethered Angel and Fall Into the Light. These songs really got you hyped for this album, especially. I mean, this album has many great songs on it, of course, like Barstool Warrior and Pale Blue Dot. These are all just solid tracks, of course. I really like this album a lot, and it's definitely one of the best albums of the year. So, yeah, if you have not listened to this album yet and you're looking for one of the best albums of the year to check out, please check out Dream Theater's newest album, Distance Over Time. I mean, if you haven't checked out Dream Theater yet, you're really doing yourself a big favor. This album is excellent. Excellent progressive metal, and yeah, some of the most impressive work from the band in a while, I'd say. Definitely can't go wrong with this album, for sure. And Dream Theater is actually another band I got into a little bit later. I got into them last year, but yeah, I'm glad that I got into them. And, this new album, Distance Over Time, it's just a great album. So that's what I got at number 3. Dream Theater's newest album, Distance Over Time. So we're here at number 2. Now, I actually expected this album to be somewhere maybe at number 4, number 5 maybe. But this album has grown on me a lot. There's many songs that I've returned to on this album. And the album at number 2 I got is Fear Inoculum by Tool. This is, of course, the band's first album in 13 years. And this is a solid album. I don't think it's one of Tool's best albums, but it's definitely a great album. This band has never released a bad album. This album, Fear Inoculum, is without exception. Like I said, there's many songs on this album that have grown on me a lot. Like the title track, Pneuma, whatever the second track is called, Invincible, Descending, Calling Voices. These are all just fantastic songs. These are just awesome tracks, I think. Like I said, I don't think it's one of Tool's best albums. I don't think, they'll ever reach the days of, like, Lateralis, Anima, albums like them, but this album is fantastic for sure. And it's good to see after 13 years, Tool can still create great music. So, yeah, you can't go wrong with this album. I know this album also has its fair share of haters, either by people that just don't like Tool, or people that are, I guess, just stuck in the past, only prefer their older stuff. But I dig this album, honestly. I think it's excellent. And it's my second favorite album of the year, honestly. And I mean, it's Tool. You can't go wrong with it. So, yeah, this album is just, well, phenomenal, dare I say. So, yeah, that's what I got at number 2. Tool's newest album, Fear Inoculum, at number 2. Okay, so we're here at number 1, guys. Now, if you've been following this channel, you guys might already know what number 1 is on my list. Now, this is a band that I actually did get into earlier this year, so it's kind of surprising to see this album at number 1. But, you know, this album, I think, has almost no flaws. I pretty much have no complaints with this album. It is, of course, a band that is progressive metal, and they're one of the kings of progressive metal. You guys already know what it is. My number one favorite album of this year is The Verdict by Queensryche. This album is just glorious. It's a fantastic album. I think it's maybe their best album since maybe Promised Land or Empire. Yeah, it's definitely their best album in a while. I mean, goes to show that Queensryche can still create great music, and I think that this album, The Verdict, is easily the best album that they've done with Todd La Torre. I know there's still debates on that. I do like their last album, Condition Human, but I think this album tops that album, honestly. And I wouldn't say it's because I've, got into the band this year either. I genuinely think it's, a much better record. This album is just fantastic, of course. It has some of my favorite songs of the year on it. I mean, Blood of the Levens, Man the Machine, Dark Reverie, Bent, Portrait. These are all just solid tracks, man. If you have not listened to The Verdict by Queensryche, go check out this album. It's my favorite album of the year, for sure. Always has been. Ever since I've listened to this album, it's pretty much been my favorite number one album of the year. And yeah, that's all I got to say about it. It's a fantastic album. If you guys just have to listen to this album for yourself to know what I'm talking about. It's a fantastic album for sure. I wouldn't necessarily say that this is a good starting point for Queensryche fans. I would definitely start off with their 80s work. But for what this album is, you got to appreciate it for sure. It's just a fantastic album. So that's what I got at number one. The Verdict by Queensryche. Well, there you have it, guys. That is my end of the year list 2019. I gave you guys what I thought were the best albums of 2019. Let me know if you guys have listened to any of these albums, and if so, let me know what you guys think of the albums that I've listed, and let me know what were your favorite albums of 2019. Now, I realize that I'm uploading this video a lot sooner than most people's lists, but I just figured that, I would do it now, because all the albums I was looking forward to this year have already came out. And I think at some point I will do a worst albums of the year list. That's something that I've actually never done before on this channel, but I would like to do that this year. So yeah, let me know what you guys think of my end of the year list, the best albums of 2019. So with that being said, thanks for watching, have a nice day, and take care.